podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Salah. Escape Cancelo. Oh, it's brilliant from Mo Salah. And still, Salah is sensational. Salah is it. What a strike. Yuri Tielemans. That is what is it.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, EPL Index proudly brings to you the best prediction podcast in the world, A Tad Predictable. Your host, Tadiwa Chanakira.
And we're back. Welcome to another episode of A Tad Predictable, the post-season edition, where we are continuing our series running through the EPL teams for the 24-25 season, looking at what they did last season, what they'll be hoping to do in this coming season, and obviously what that means for their transfer window and their summer, what they need to get done in order to make sure they achieve their goals for next season. Last episode, we discussed Everton. We broke down, the takeover situation that's currently going on there. We looked at some of the players that they're looking to bring in, some of the players that potentially could be leaving. We gave, obviously, Calvert-Lewin the ultimatum of sign a new contract or you're leaving, because you can't afford to have players like that leaving on a free transfer if you're Everton and the financial situation they were finding themselves in recently. But this episode, I'm excited to say, is about the team that was a team for A Tad Predictable 23-24 season, Fulham. And it was an up and down season, topsy-turvy season. Obviously, didn't start off in the best footing with the news of Mitrovic saying he wanted to leave and then eventually getting that move. I'm sure wouldn't have been great for Silva and the rest of the squad in terms of what he was bringing to the team. And look, sometimes one door closes, another door opens. We saw how well they sort of did, if I can say, with the deputization of Muniz coming in, certainly for fantasy football players. He was a big factor in helping keep Fulham in and around the conversation of, not being in trouble when it comes to joining relegation battles or anything like that, but also having a deep run in one of the cup competitions, obviously falling a bit short there, losing in the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup. But we will get through all of that. We'll look at what they need to do this summer, what their goals are for next season, and then I also want to save a little topic for some of the youngsters that are there. How much time are they going to get heading into the season, or do they fill their roster spots with brand new signings? But let's kick off by looking back at what Fulham did towards the end of last season. As I hinted to a couple of seconds ago with regards to their season, they ended up finishing the Premier League in 13th position on 47 points, just 1 point behind Brighton, who were on 48, and Bournemouth, who are on 48 as well. So if you're looking at the company they're keeping, finishing 1 point above Wolves, and at least, they were finishing 7 points ahead of Everton. Obviously, we know Everton would have the points deduction. But looking at the league table, I think they would have been very happy, considering how the season started, that they ended up finishing where they ended up finishing. I mean, they were well clear of the relegation zone. Usually 40 points is enough to guarantee that you're staying in the Premier League. This time around in the Premier League, 26 points is what got Luton relegated. So they were well clear of that conversation of relegation. And I don't think, based on not last season, but the season before that, Fulham would have even expected to be anywhere in and around that conversation. They were probably looking further up the table and trying to see what they could do and in clawing, some of those positions back, because they did really well the season before that. But then, obviously, as I said, the transfer situation kind of rocked them a little bit. We saw Mitrovic go. We saw the sort of standoff that happened with Paulinho, and then obviously, at now he's secured that move that he wanted last season, but that couldn't have been a easy situation to navigate. So a little bit of turmoil heading into last season. I'm not surprised, looking at their form for the entire season, that they only had 2 back-to-back wins the entire season. That was in game week 15 and 16. I believe those games were both at home, both 5-0 wins. Those in December, it was Nottingham Forest a 5-0 win, and then Fulham beating West Ham, a London derby, 5-0. So those were back-to-back wins there. And then in February, late February, March, they had back-to-back wins. Obviously, that famous win at Old Trafford, 2-1 to Fulham there. And then they came home and did the job on Brighton and won 3-0 there. So those were the 2 sort of back-to-back win games that they had for the entire season, looking at it from a Premier League perspective. And that's probably where they would want to start in terms of fixing things for next season is, can we get a bit more consistency? Can we string a couple more wins together, maybe distance the losses by a couple of draws in there as well, would be what they would be hoping for. And I think there's room for Fulham to grow next season, a bit more stability hopefully for them heading into the season. Mitrovic's situation is obviously resolved because he left last season. Paulinho's situation has now been resolved because he's left for Bayern Munich. So hopefully for their sake, they can go into this season with drama-free from a transfer perspective, from players wanting to leave or anything like that, and can fully focus on delivering what there would be. I'm sure their fans will be hoping for a higher finish than the position that I mentioned, the 13th position finish that they had last season. Now, I'm going to start there in terms of ambition, because it's kind of a tricky situation for Fulham. As I hinted at, obviously, they had that period where you were looking at them being stable in the Premier League and saying, okay, what can they do going forward? How can they continue to climb the table? Obviously, in the 22-23 season, so that would have been 2 seasons ago, we saw them finishing in 10th place. They did relatively well, in my opinion, in terms of their momentum and their form throughout the season. And I think they would have been looking to build from that. They obviously finished ahead of the likes of Crystal Palace and Chelsea in that season. A ways away, about 7 points away from Brentford, exactly 7 points. Thank you, Mr. Gadrick in my ear. Exactly 7 points away from Brentford in that season. So again, they probably would have seen that they've got 7 points to close to 9th. And then behind them, they've got a buffer of 7 points as well. So if anything, they're going to be trying to solidify finishing in the top 10 again. And then it didn't transpire last season. So hopefully they get to hit the reset button and focus on delivering a top 10 finish. It's not going to be easy. The league is getting tougher and tougher each season. But I do think that would be at least the minimum ambition that they would be hoping for from the likes of Tony Khan and the crew. Now, is that enough? Is that enough for Fulham fans? I've spoken to some Fulham fans, and it seems like the spectrum really does go from opposite ends. I've spoken to Fulham fans who are saying, obviously, if we're finishing in the mid-table to top 10, I think that's solid. Do that for a couple of seasons and continue to strengthen the squad, and then look to challenge a bit higher. Then you've got the other side of the spectrum that are saying, look, the Khans are wealthy, the club is in a good financial position, they should be backing Silva, who's a great manager, and by all accounts, especially from the people that I've spoken to, he's well loved at Fulham, and they appreciate the talent that he brings to that Fulham team from a coaching perspective and a development perspective. Give him the tools that he needs in order to push further up the table. They should be doing and emulating kind of the stuff that Aston Villa have been doing in recent seasons, of being ambitious, making bold signings, looking to challenge for those European spots. So that's the other side of the spectrum from fans that I've spoken to, as I've mentioned, is can we become what Aston Villa have been over the last couple of seasons, which is challenging for those European spots and causing a bit of commotion amongst some of those, in inverted commas, traditionally big six teams. But yeah, so that's going to be key. And I guess maybe this transfer window will tell us a lot about what the ambitions are for Fulham and their owners. As I said, they've got the Paulinho money in now. Let's see how they spend that. There are a few players that they've been linked to, and we'll discuss them a bit later on. We'll see, is that going to be enough to propel them up the table? They've, lost some players on free transfers. Obviously, Tosin was a big one. Willian was, an experienced head in the team. And then Bobby Dickadover-Reid, he's joined Leicester on a free transfer in the recent weeks. So, yeah, there's going to be some changes that need to take place for them in order to achieve, a higher finish than 13th heading into next season. But one of the sticking points with regards to Tony Khan is he's a very busy man. We know him and his father are involved with the Jacksonville Jaguars, the NFL team, American football team. That's a team that also plays a lot of their games in the UK. So does that split their time when Jacksonville comes to town? Are there ambitions to try and make Jacksonville, a permanently London-based team, and how much efforts are going into that? Those kind of things, how much attention is it taking away from, what they need to be doing at Fulham? Then, obviously, Tony Khan, his pet project, AEW Wrestling. He's a big wrestling fan. He's been his whole life pretty much. Again, a company that's trying to compete with the best wrestling, or the biggest wrestling company. I might not say best wrestling company. That would be a personal opinion. But undisputedly, the biggest wrestling company, WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, they obviously are the number one in terms of the big brand. AEW are, fighting to be the number two. There's obviously New Japan Pro Wrestling, there is TNA or Impact Wrestling. But yeah, AEW probably is the second best at the moment. How much effort is involved in trying to close the gap between them and WWE? They've got TV deals that they need to be securing in the near future, and a lot is happening in and around AEW. Tony Khan is very heavily involved there. So again, is he splitting himself, or is he spreading himself too thin? And what are the consequences of that when it comes to Fulham? You'd hope that they've got people in place at Fulham that can keep the ship running and keep it running in a way that's going to make them ambitious, a way that's going to make them emulate what an Aston Villa have done. And I keep bringing up Aston Villa because, as I said, Fulham have the money. They are in a decent financial position. They've got redevelopments on the stadium that they're doing and exploring to do even more. It's, again, from Fulham fans that I've spoken to, they don't want to move away from Craven Cottage. There's so much history there. There's so much love for that ground. But maybe, building it up a little bit more, trying to get a few more seats into the ground would be beneficial for them, and maybe updating some of the infrastructure as well in and around there. So that's the task for Tony Khan and his crew. Can they become like an Aston Villa in terms of causing problems for teams trying to get into European football? In terms of on the field stuff, it's semi on the field because assistant coaches are very much heavily involved, certainly from a training perspective. We all know Luis Boamete was a huge deputy to Marco Silva, obviously, when he was appointed as the head coach of Fulham. He brought his close associate, Luis Boamete, with him to the first team coaching, but he's now left, and obviously he's departed with well wishes from all perspectives, and it seems like he's going to be taking over, or he is going to be taking over Guinea-Bissau, and trying to see if he can help them from a national perspective. So that's an exciting adventure for him. I'm sure Marco Silva would have sent him with well wishes and probably left the door open for him to come back if need be. But Marco Silva's had to then now bring in a brand new assistant manager. And obviously that's come in the form of Goncalo Santos. Now, Fulham have appointed him, 37-year-old, and obviously the past few months he was managing in the Premier League. He was the manager of Casapiao. Now, he was appointed in February, so he didn't really get that much time to, bed in his sort of philosophy and his ideas into that team. But he's obviously someone that's worked with Marco Silva in the past, and obviously that relationship just continues to blossom. I think in terms of time spent at Fulham, obviously he previously spent 6 years with the Cottagers as a player, and he has helped his compatriot consolidate a place in the top flight over the past couple of years.
Throw the best birthday party ever that your child will always talk about. Big Air Trampoline Park inside Fieldhouse USA at the Polaris Mall can do just that. Award-winning birthday party packages start at just $300. And all birthday parties include pizza, drinks, a party room with a party host, grip socks, printed invitations, and all 40 attractions at Big Air Trampoline Park. It's a birthday party you and your kids will never forget. Book your party today. Big Air Columbus, where the fun never ends. Visit BigAirUSA.com/Columbus for details.
What he's going to bring, I'm assuming it's going to be more from a training ground perspective, from a player development perspective. And as I said, he is someone that would have had that connection with Marco Silva. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Estroli, where they had that relationship blossom for about 3 years. And if I'm not right about that, I'm sure I'll be corrected in my ear. But I believe that was the case. I think it was 2011, 2012, 2013, something like that. They can check in the background. But he worked with Marco Silva, so there is that relationship, as I've mentioned. So that seems like he's going to fit in quite seamlessly. So now they've got him in. Is the style of play going to change slightly? Is maybe the approach in from a tactical perspective going to change slightly? We've seen, for example, with the likes of Jurgen Klopp, when Pep Linders started becoming his assistant manager and getting more influence, the style of football changed quite a bit, actually. Obviously, the fundamentals were still there, but the approach to the attacking play shifted. So it will be interesting to see if Fulham roll out the same style as they did last season, or are there going to be subtle changes, and how quickly are those changes going to be put in place, or do they wait a little bit before they do something like that? So that's something to keep an eye on. In terms of what else to keep an eye on, it's obviously then looking at what business is going to be and has taken place from a Fulham perspective. I think we'll start with the obvious, which would be the sales, and then we'll head into incomings. But before we head into the incomings, I do want to talk about some of the exciting youngsters that Fulham have in their ranks, and whether or not they can fill some of the holes that have been left instead of going and dipping into the transfer market. It's always a tricky situation. It's a balancing act in terms of promoting players from within, and then also going to get players that can come in and hit the ground running straight away. So let's look at the players' sales from their perspective. The big one is, it's the João Palhinha one. It's a year in the making. It ends up being in the mid 40 million with add-ons, which takes it to about 50 million pounds. They were hoping for closer to 60, and if I'm correct, and I believe I am, Sporting Lisbon were due a sell-on percentage of any sale. I think it was 20% that they would get for any sale of João Palhinha. So Fulham, did they have to take that into account when they were looking to, sell him? Maybe last season that's what put the brakes on his move to Bayern Munich, is they were looking to make up some of the some of the sell-on clause that they would have been missing out on. Now he goes big hole in midfield for them. Whether or not they can replace what he brought to the team with one player, I don't know, because he was such a special player, such a unique player in and around European football. More so the fact that Bayern Munich were willing to wait a year for him to come in. Usually big clubs like that, they can pivot to the next best, or an alternative target, but they were willing to wait for him. So obviously that's a big news in terms of what they were expecting him to bring to the table. Fulham, can a Fulham replace a Paulinho as easily as maybe, let's say, if a Bayern Munich was replacing a Paulinho? Probably not, and I don't think I'm being disrespectful from that perspective. The caliber of player that they would be able to attract is slightly different to the caliber that Paulinho had reached. But again, when Paulinho came to them, he was a bit inconsistent, and they developed him to this stage where Bayern Munich are looking to bring him in. Obviously, he was talented when he came in, but it's that development that then elevated the player. Can Marco Silva do something similar with maybe the next person that they do bring in? That's something they're going to be having to look at. But expecting someone to come in and play to the level that Paulinho was playing at, I think would be a tall order and would be an unfair standard to put on whoever does come in and have to fill those shoes. So he goes to Bayern Munich. Tosin Adebayo, he goes to Chelsea on a free transfer. Now, the first thing that was mentioned to me when I was talking to some Fulham fans with regards to this transfer is, how dare he do this to Fulham? He knows the rivalry between Fulham and Chelsea. Him going to Chelsea on a free transfer is just it's unforgivable. And then I was like, wait, but what about Willian? Kind of the opposite. But anyway, so that's an interesting take, is that he had the option to go to Newcastle. Man United were flirting with him a little bit behind the scenes, but he ends up with Chelsea. I guess he gets to stay in London. Maybe that was the big draw for him. But joining a team that there is that rivalry between the two clubs kind of seems a bit left field, in my opinion. So we'll see whether or not he gets a warm welcome when he does play Fulham later on in this season. I've also been told by some Fulham fans that they weren't too upset with losing him, in terms of he is what he is. He's a he's a good Premier League centre-back, but he is error-prone. He does have errors in him. And they were saying Chelsea are soon going to find out about that, and maybe they're going to start getting frustrated with him. But again, is it then an opportunity? And this is how it was put to me. Is it an opportunity to then upgrade from a Tosin, who, as I mentioned, good player but error-prone? Can they go and get a good player that's not as error-prone, or an even better player than him, and try and elevate it that way? So that's something that we're definitely going to be trying to keep an eye on, to see whether or not they'll be able to do that. I mentioned Bobby De Cordova-Reid. He's gone, his contract ran out. He's gone to Leicester. He obviously, for De Cordova-Reid and for Willian, they've both had, opportunities to sign new contracts with Fulham. They've been offered new contracts, but they haven't taken those up. So it will be interesting to see whether or not, they will come to regret that, whether or not Willian will want to come back, or, obviously, it depends whether or not he is, he's sort of reflected on his career and what he wants to do next. There were offers, and from Fulham's perspective, of trying to bring him back. But again, that word opportunity is going to keep creeping its head every now and then on this podcast. Is there an opportunity to upgrade on a Willian? Yes, he comes with the experience, but he didn't quite have the physical attributes that he used to have. Obviously, that's understandable, considering he's 35 years old now, and did rely on sort of those being a pacey, direct winger. He's had to change his style of play slightly, not too much, but slightly. And again, he can't deliver that level of high-end performance on a consistent basis for long periods of time, over and over and over again. They can't rely on him to do that anymore. So can they bring in a youngster who can still bring, some of the things that he would bring from a physical standpoint, from a talent standpoint, maybe not yet from an experienced head standpoint, but can they get someone to emulate that? Similar with the Cordova-Reid. Can they bring in a younger player? Cordova-Reid kind of has hit his ceiling in terms of what he's going to be as a player. I think he's a great squad player for a Fulham that can come in 20, 30 minutes here and then. When players are injured, you can throw him into the lineup and he's at least going to put in a shift for you. But can they go get maybe a more exciting youngster with more potential and see, take a gamble from that perspective? So 2 opportunities, again, that word, opportunity, drink every time he says opportunity. Don't do that. Not on this podcast because it's going to be said quite a few times. But those 2 players, I'm curious to see how they replace them as well from that Fulham perspective. In terms of other players that have left, I mean, most of them are now just fringe players and the Tyrese Francois, for example, who's gone to Wigan on a free transfer. I'm not going to dive deep into those type of players. It is what it is. And, you wish them well in their careers going forward. But those were the main ones. The Paulinho to Bayern, Tosin Adebayo on a free transfer to Chelsea, Bobby Cordova-Reid, free transfer to Leicester. And then Willian, obviously, there's still that question mark there. But at present point in time, not with Fulham. Now, is there issues with the fact that a Cordova-Reid, a Tosin, maybe not Willian, considering the age, are leaving on free transfers? Could they have gotten money for them? Maybe that's something to look at in the future. Can we tie some of these players down to longer term deals earlier, or when their contracts are starting to wind down, so we don't get in that situation where they're leaving on free transfers? I'm sure Tosin, they could have gotten a decent fee for him from any number of clubs in the Premier League had it been a situation where he wanted to leave but was under contract. So maybe another thing for Tony Khan to keep an eye on, because it's not like he's got other things that he needs to be keeping an eye on. But yeah, something maybe to think about if you are a Tony Khan. But I'll leave you guys to think about those sales. Start to think about what then they can do in terms of filling those holes. I've mentioned, some youngsters that I'm going to talk about. Maybe you guys have some already in mind of which youngsters you want to be moved up to the first team and have an impact next season. But before we do that, guys, do go and check out Liberty Shield. This podcast is sponsored by EPLindex.com in association with Liberty Shield. Obviously, Liberty Shield is a VPN provider, which is a virtual private network. You obviously, guys, as I said, you can check out their services at libertyshield.com. If you use the coupon code EPL25, you'll get 25% off of your software VPN. One of my favorite things to use with Liberty Shield is obviously watching American sports, as I like to mention. It allows me to not have to worry and scramble to see whether or not these sports are being showcased in the UK on a UK channel or something like that. No, I've got Liberty Shield. I'm sorted out. I can, unlock geolock content. I can change my location from that perspective to be able to unlock that USA content. It's also really, really good to make sure that you are safe when you're using your devices on public Wi-Fi's. If you want to, as I mentioned, unlock geolock content, if you don't want to get locked out of your bank account when you're traveling, and just generally protecting your online data. We know that's a big thing at the moment. So just do the right thing and protect your data. It's so simple. Go to libertyshield.com. Either you get you can either download the software VPN, which downloads straight to your devices. It can be used on multiple devices, or you can get the router, which gets delivered to you. And I've got the router. I've got the software on my laptops as well. As I said, I'm a huge fan of them, and we thank them for sponsoring this show. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to come back and see what Fulham can do in the summer, whether it's promoting players from the youth teams or bringing in players and signings. I'm excited about the opportunity that Fulham have to go and elevate themselves and maybe jump a couple of spots next season, especially considering how optimistic they may have been before some of the turmoil happened towards the end of their transfer window last season, in the summer. But yeah, let's take this quick break and we will be right back after these short messages. All right, we are back. Thank you for sticking with us. We are talking all things Fulham. We've discussed the players that have gone from Fulham. We're looking now at what players are going to be coming into Fulham. But before we discuss some of the potential signings they could be making, I do want to discuss some of the players that they have in their academy. So I'm going to start off with, obviously, if you're looking at from a fullback perspective, they've got a really exciting young fullback, Devon Tanton. He's quite young, pacey right back. It is how I would describe him. And we've seen some of these young fullbacks coming into teams recently, obviously Connor Bradley at Liverpool, for example, where they are obviously built different in that they've grown up playing the right back position in these academies at the moment, where it's not just being a player that goes up and down the pitch and hugs the touchline it just crosses the ball, hits the byline and crosses the ball. No, there's a lot more to their game. But as we've seen with Kyle Walker's career, there's no substitution for pace. And if you've got a pacey player like him, it does help alleviate some of the defensive issues if they do then have defensive issues. So I think it would be cool to see him in and around the squad. Maybe get him involved in some of the Carabao Cup games or the FA Cup games. If there are injuries, then he's got some fixtures with the team. He's training with the team and can slot in to that right back slot. As I mentioned, they did really well in the Carabao Cup last season, ended up losing in the semi-finals to Liverpool. FA Cup, not as well as I think they would have wanted. Obviously, last season, they had that inconsistency in the Premier League. They had the consistency in the Carabao Cup, but then FA Cup, they were in the third round, they were out in the fourth round, but again, maybe the toll of the season took its toll. Also, the fact that the second semi-final against Liverpool was on the 24th of January, and then their fourth round FA Cup game was on the 27th of January. Talk about an energy dump. Talk about a mental dump in terms of just exhaustion from the mental battle that was, those Liverpool games and trying to get to a cup final. I'm sure it wouldn't have been easy to then try and switch attentions after being disappointed at losing that game, then having to host a Newcastle team that was also looking to do well in cup competitions, and obviously they lost that one 2-0. So I don't think the FA Cup thing, it's too much of a worry, that performance, but the Carabao Cup was promising, and hopefully they used that to springboard them into next season. But yeah, the first one I mentioned, obviously, is bringing in a young right back to be in and around the squad, get him some minutes and see if he can become a stalwart. Because I don't think the right-hand side is as locked down as the left-hand side with Robertson. I think Anthony Robertson, and that's hopefully someone they will be wanting to keep for a long period of time. He's really came to the forefront last season and certainly has caught the eye of some of the bigger teams in the Premier League and abroad. The right-hand side, yes, they've got decent players there, but it's not as locked down as that left-hand side. So maybe there's an opportunity for young Devon to come in and stake a claim. Sticking with the defensive players, there's another young player, young centre-back. Obviously, I mentioned Tosin. He's gone to Chelsea. Luke DeFogelos, I think he's talented. Obviously, you're very cautious with young centre-backs because from a physical standpoint, they're still developing, and maybe you don't want to throw them in too soon. But is that something that they could take a gamble on? Do they bring him straight into that starting role? I mean, it would be a tall task to tell him, look, you're stepping straight up to Premier League action, and maybe they can bring in an experience. If I was them, right, I would want to keep the door open for Luke to make sure that he stays at Fulham, he develops, he becomes the starting centre back and, a focal point of that defence in the immediate, in the near future. So instead of going with another maybe young centre back, I know Tosin, for example, 26 years of age, maybe going with a slightly older centre back that can come in, that's experienced, that can handle themselves in the Premier League for this season, and then they slowly integrate Luke into the team and then see if he can blossom. But he's one I would want certainly in and around the team. He seems to be quite comfortable on the ball, decent defending, but as I said, maybe the physical side of the Premier League might be something that he would need to adjust to. There's a big jump at the moment from the Premier League 2 or the under-23s or under-21s or under-18s to the Premier League at the moment. That's something from a long-term perspective the FA have been trying to figure out of how do we make it, how do we close that gap between the different age groups. But yeah, the next person that I want to be speaking about, very technically gifted midfielder, Matt Dibley-Diaz. As I said, Paulinho's left. There's a big hole there. Again, these youngsters, I'm not expecting them to come in and fill the roles and play at the level of the players that have left. But is there an opportunity to leave the door open for these players to come in and try and stake a claim for the team and stake a claim for the jersey, should I say? So that's one to keep an eye on. If those three players are in and around the team, on the in match day squads, getting minutes in the Carabao Cups, if games are going really well and Fulham are winning, they get thrown on into some Premier League games. I think those are three players from the Fulham Academy that I'll be wanting them to develop and hopefully see within the next couple of years they become, sort of like a spine, if you could say, although it's a right back, a centre back and a midfielder. Not quite, it's quite a weird spine, but you get what I mean. If they can become pillars of that team going forward, they've come from the academy and they know the Fulham way, that would be really cool. But as I'm hinting to, yes, the opportunity is there for them to impress in pre-season and hopefully get a chance to be in and around the squad. I do think if the ambition for Fulham is to get back into 10th or higher and try and cause problems for teams that are competing for those European spots, I think then maybe it's a season too soon for the three young players that I've mentioned. Then you might be looking to bring in some more experienced players. So let's take a look at some of those. So in terms of midfield, someone to replace Paulinho. Look, there have been rumours recently of maybe a Scott McTominay coming in. We know that Man United are looking to sell Scott McTominay. I think obviously the emergence of Kobe Mainoo may have put the writing on the wall for Scott McTominay, but in terms of whether or not Man United are going to be asking for too much money for him, that's going to be something that's telling. And then also whether or not Scott McTominay wants to move away from Man United, and or where does he want to move? Where does he set his stall to say, look, I'm happy to go here, I'm not happy to go there? That will be interesting to see. But I think in terms of, from a Fulham perspective, I think bringing in a player like a Scott McTominay, he's got experience of, coming from that big club in Man United. I think he's a player that wouldn't be fazed by the obviously inevitable comparisons that he's going to get to whoever comes in, whether they're young, old, whatever they are, whoever comes in as a midfielder for Fulham. Everyone's going to be talking about, is this the replacement for Paulinho? And that scrutiny is going to be intense. I think a player like a Scott McTominay will be able to handle something like that. And I do think that obviously he adds maybe a bit more going forward. We've seen the amount of goals that he scored last season for Man United. Ten Hag, maybe from a personal perspective, he's okay keeping Scott McTominay in and around the squad, especially with the likes of Donny van der Beek, etc., that will be leaving. I think from his perspective, if Erik ten Hag could have it his way, I think he wouldn't mind keeping McTominay. But I think from a Man United squad building perspective, they've got other players that they're wanting to bring in, and there's just not going to be space for a Scott McTominay. So there's an opportunity there for Fulham to go and get him. I think it will be a clever signing from Fulham. I wouldn't recommend going and getting like a Calvin Phillips, for example, because we just don't know what kind of player he is at the moment. In terms of other players that have been linked with them, we're looking slightly forward. Obviously they like to play sort of like 4-2-3-1 system, if I can say. There have been murmurs of, Pereira, is he 1 foot out of the door? Would they be willing to take offers for him? Well, I think that's a position that they can improve on, bringing in sort of that attacking midfielder, second supporting striker, roaming playmaker type. We've seen Iwobi get used there at times as well. From a midfield perspective, Iwobi plays everywhere, really. But one player that I think would be really exciting for them would be Emile Smith-Rowe. Again, a player that would be staying in London if he gets that move. But I think, he's clearly not in favour at Arsenal. I personally, from my own personal perspective, I hope he either goes to Crystal Palace or Fulham, because I think he would really, really do well at either of those clubs. I think he would get the freedom to express himself from a creative standpoint with the styles of play that both of those teams play. So, yeah, I'm hoping that they free Emile Smith-Rowe this season and he gets to land at one of these clubs. So Fulham, why not? I hope he gets to go to Fulham then. Let's put it that way. We'll scale it back a little bit, back to that deeper midfield role. I've mentioned Scott McTominay. The other option is obviously one they've been flirting with for a number of transfer windows now. Is Andre, obviously the Brazilian, I think he's 22, 23 years old now, centre midfielder. Not quite a traditional defensive midfielder, maybe looking to win the ball a bit higher up the pitch, but again, someone that can come into that midfield position and try and maybe he can be molded into sort of like more a box-to-box midfielder that's strong in the challenge. I could see Marco Silva trying to build him into that ilk of player, which could work well for them. So yeah, that's another player that they've had long-term interest. They've flirted with him a couple of times. Can they finally get that one over the line? I don't know. We will see. He's a player that was also previously linked with Liverpool, for example, at one point when Liverpool were looking to replace Fabinho. So a guy that is highly rated within world football. I think he would be an interesting signing for Fulham. So between those players, that would kind of sort the midfield areas out, in my opinion. And then obviously trying to bring in more depth up front, in my opinion, would be quite cool. And I wouldn't go any further than Eddie Nketiah. Again, just go to Arsenal and get both. Is that possible? Package a deal for both of them. That would be quite cool. They obviously get to come together. With Smith-Rowe and Nketiah, they will have a chip on their shoulder, in my opinion. I think those would be the signings that I would be looking to make if I was Fulham heading into next season, is promoting the three youngsters so they're in and around the squad. Obviously, they can always go back and play some of the younger team games if they need match fitness, etc. But have them in and around the squad. Start getting them used to being part of the senior squad permanently. And then when you've got those players, then you're looking at bringing in Nketiah. I would bring in Emile Smith-Rowe along with Nketiah because I think that would be really fun to watch. And then I would go McTominay over Andre. Maybe the potential of Andre, he has a higher ceiling than McTominay, but I like the floor of McTominay. I think Andre's got a lower floor, but a potentially higher ceiling. I think McTominay's got a higher floor, maybe not as high a ceiling, but he will bring some stability to that midfield. He's got the experience in, Premier League proven, as people like to say. But again, someone that I think has got that experience of being at a club where the scrutiny is on you. He'll be under scrutiny, having been considered the replacement for a Paulinho. But yeah, I think Fulham have an opportunity to do something special this season, make it fun, make it exciting. Again, we will learn a lot more about their ambitions, what Tony Khan is looking to do with Fulham based on what they do in this transfer window. Is there in the background potential for frustration for Marco Silva? That's my one big concern for Fulham. If they don't back him in the way he maybe wants to be backed or is hoping to be backed in this transfer window, does he then turn around and start thinking, maybe this isn't the club for me, maybe I can go somewhere else and fulfill my ambitions elsewhere? We know he's had interest from some of the Saudi Arabian clubs. He's turned those down before. Maybe he's looking to stay in and around European football. So we know the Premier League is quite, it's got a hot trigger in terms of firing managers. If one of these big name managers does go, does his head get turned if Fulham aren't backing him? If he's feeling like he's not able to, maximize what he wants to do at Fulham, that is the big concern for me when it comes to Fulham. But other than that, I'm expecting a really fun season from them. I'm expecting them to get back to not last season, but the season before and what they were doing there and propelling themselves up the table. Hopefully Muniz continues his good form. Another season where Jimenez is back from injury and continuing to grow in confidence, obviously would be good for them. But yeah, I think they're the bones there for what could be a decent season, a decent team. Just need to obviously sort out that centre-back position, maybe a more experienced head, as I've mentioned, just to give Luke a chance to get that position later on, over the next couple of years. Midfield, we've addressed. That attacking midfielder position, I do think they can strengthen there. We've addressed that. And then, obviously, up front, bring in Eddie Nketiah and make it a really, really fun situation. Whether or not they would also then look to bring in some wingers. Obviously, I mentioned Dika Dover-Reeve leaving. He can play up front. He can pretty much play any of those four positions, whether it's the person up front or the three supporting positions behind them. So maybe bringing in someone like Nketiah that could probably do all of those positions, like Dika Dover-Reeve, but obviously to a high level, in my opinion, could be the way to go to cover all those positions. So yeah, we're going to be keeping a close eye on them. As I mentioned, they were the team of a tad predictable last season, so we've obviously got affinity with them from that perspective. I don't think we can go back to back with the team for a tad predictable in terms of who the team that the podcast will be rooting for that season. So Fulham are out of contention for that. I think I've already thrown the name of Bournemouth in the hat, if I'm not mistaken. Then I think the rest of the team have thrown in a couple of other names. So we'll see what happens there. But tomorrow, we're going to be discussing Ipswich, and that's going to be a fun podcast because they're doing some interesting things. They've made a couple of signings as well. Obviously, the big one for them was keeping their manager, but we'll dive deep into Ipswich and what it is they're going to be looking to do next season. But for this episode, that is going to do it for us. In terms of plugs, guys, obviously go and check out EPL Index website. There's news, reports, player analysis, everything that you could wish for, especially during this transfer window. Go and check out the daily podcast show. It's a 2 for the podcast where Dave Hendrick discusses the hottest topics in football. Go and subscribe to EPL Index on your podcast providers. Go and follow at A Tad Predictable on the app formerly known as Twitter. Go and follow at EPL Index on that same app. Give us 5 stars on your podcast providers. Write positive comments. That stuff really, really does go a long way, and we really appreciate that. I've been Tadiwa Chanakira. You can find me on the app at Tad Predicts. Huge thanks to Obi Semenya. He's at John Empire SA, and Jody, she's at Spursy141. Our producer behind the glass, Mr. Gadrinkle, he's at Gadrinkle, and for Gadrinkle, for the team and myself, remember, Chisingaperi, Chinoshura.
Oh, Mr. Station! Fulham, innocent, Roger Strike, Yuri Tiedemann. And then we know, that is what to sit thing like. And then it's not so good.
Sports Social Podcast Network.